Hi, welcome to Bookmark. I'm your host, Don Noble. My guest today is author Lesa Carnes Shaul, now a professor of English at Livingston University. But Lesa was born and raised in a country outside Boaz, Alabama, on Sand Mountain. Ms. Shaul is the author of Midnight Cry, A Shooting on Sand Mountain. I spoke with Lesa Shaul in Studio UA in the Digital Media Center on the campus of the University of Alabama. Lesa, it's nice to see you again.
Hi, Don. It's good to be here.
You and I have been acquainted for ages.
Yes. It's just how many we will not disclose, but yes.
Well, you've been down at Livingston for years and years,
right,
working side by side with our friend Joe Taylor.
Oh, yes.
Yes. And you had an earlier book, which was academic.
Yes.
But this one is not.
No.
This is a true crime novel set on Sand Mountain.
Yes.
And you are a sophisticated English professor now, but you are from Sand Mountain.
Yes, I grew up in the holler, as we say. I'm from the community of Horton, which is a little unincorporated place nestled sort of between Boaz, Alabama, and Douglas, Alabama. I grew up on a poultry farm there.
Between Boaz and Douglas, ideally located then.
Oh, yes, it's the greater metro area. I'm kidding.
There is farming on Sand Mountain, but it's not the same kind of farming as Black Belt. Black Belt had good soil.
Right.
What happens on Sand Mountain?
The soil's really thin. I mean, it's a sandstone plateau. We self-aggrandize and call it Sand Mountain, but it's sort of where the Appalachians start to trickle off at the end. So it's, thin soil. A lot of crops that grow happily in other parts of the state struggle. So it was it was sort of ripe for the poultry industry to get a foothold in the 60s and 70s. But the period that I write about in the book is before then, when a lot of people still tried to farm cotton, soybeans, corn, other crops like that.
And it was hard.
It was backbreaking, yeah.
The soil didn't yield well. And this was a relatively isolated spot inside Alabama. And from your book, and every once in a while I accidentally refer to it as a novel, which I think is a good thing, because you have really enlivened a true story, made it read like a novel.
Oh, thank you.
Up there on the mountain, there's hard scrabble farming, religion, and family.
Yes.
I mean, everybody has some kind of religion, everybody has some kind of family, but it's more intense up there?
Well, anthropologically speaking, mountain cultures differ from river cultures. Typically, mountain cultures are a little, they're warier of outsiders, a little more resistant to centralized authority, that kind of thing. So a little more suspicious, I think, whereas river cultures are a little more open, accepting because of the amount of trade and travel that comes through the area. And we see this played out, interestingly enough, in the 20th century in northeastern Alabama, because you have Marshall County, which is really a very small county. It's one of the smaller counties in a relatively small state. And but half of it's on the mountain and half of it's down in the valley. So you have people off the mountain who are a little more, I don't want to say cosmopolitan, but still more accepting of outsiders. And then you have the folks on the mountain, and so you have this dynamic in one tiny county, and it does create cultural differences.
When I first moved to Alabama many years ago, I heard of a phenomenon. It may have been mythical, but it was called Sand Mountain Syndrome.
Okay.
And it was people in Birmingham at UAB and at the medical center had, I think half in jest, developed a theory that they kept hiring. They were hiring a lot of people, and unemployment on Sand Mountain was high. So people would take jobs in Birmingham, move to Birmingham, or commute a great distance, and they never stayed. Apparently, the joke was they couldn't live off of Sand Mountain, and they went home. Does that make any? This would have been quite a long time ago, but still.
There is a real sense of kinship, if you want to put it that way. You know, folks like to keep to themselves and to their own kind in a lot of ways, which, especially in the period that I'm writing about, created this. I called it at one point sort of a tabula rasa in a way, at least for the public imagination, because so many people off the mountain, they thought of the mountain as kind of this mysterious place. And then in 1995, when Dennis Covington published Salvation on Sand Mountain, it seemed to sort of confirm a lot of the suspicions about what the hill folk were doing.
Yeah.
But anyway, that and that book was actually one of the catalysts in a way, as I mentioned in the preface.
Right. Well, the Covington and he emphasized snake handling churches, and there weren't, only a fraction of his book was in Alabama.
Right.
Most people don't, because of the title, people think a lot of it is set in Alabama. Most of it's set moving up the Appalachians. But religion, terribly important, and family. In this case, set in 1951, you have the Kilpatrick family.
Yes.
And Aubrey is the patriarch of this gang, and a pretty complicated character. How if someone, say me, asked you to describe Aubrey, what would you say about him?
Well, one of the first things that I have to sort of establish, especially for readers outside of the region, is why you would need a bootlegger in 1951.
Yes.
Prohibition ended in 33. But so I had to explain sort of the complicated history in the state of liquor laws and so forth. But Aubrey took advantage of it to supplement his farming income. I mean, he was not a subsistence farmer. He had over 200 acres. He was able to sustain itinerant workers and permanent tenant farmers who lived on the property. So he was fairly prosperous. But when you have a wife and 8 kids, yeah. So you got to have a little side hustle, and that's what the bootlegging accomplished for him.
And bootlegging, a distinction you make that needs making, bootlegging is not the same thing as moonshining.
Right, right.
Moonshiners do what?
They create stills and make their own alcohol, whereas bootleggers are sort of like middlemen. They're like the old Coca-Cola bottling companies that we used to see dotted around. His family was sort of a one-person bottling, or a one-family bottling company, kind of a cottage industry.
I love that part. He would drive in his car up into Tennessee where he knew moonshiners.
Right.
He would buy moonshine in gallon jugs.
Yes.
Then bring it home.
Yes.
And the part I like...
The way we do with hand soap, right?
Well, the part I like the best is that his wife and his son were in it.
Oh, the whole family.
His wife would sterilize pint bottles.
Yes.
And then his son did what?
So they would... so there were 8 children, and of course the littlest ones probably couldn't, but there were enough children of age. If you could stand up and if you could hold a jug and tilt it over into a funnel, into a sterilized bottle, then you could work on the assembly line. So they would sterilize the bottles, fill them up with the White Lightning brought down from Tennessee, and then James, the oldest child, would put the bottles in his saddlebags and drive around the Double Bridges community and deliver, sort of like home delivery.
Did he really deliver it by horseback?
Yes, he really did.
He put it in his saddlebags and went from house to house.
These were very equestrian-oriented people. Yeah, they would have big community rides where, just the specter of 10 people on horseback, at some point. Although I say 10, I don't think the littlest ones rode. But they would ride through town. A lot of people of a certain generation, people in their 80s and early 90s, remember the Kilpatricks coming to ride through town, and Aubrey sitting so sort of tall and proud in the saddle. Because, one of the things I point out in the book was he was definitely... he loved that Western ideal, the idea of the gunslinger. He had 2 nickel-plated 44 Smith & Wesson handguns, pistols. So he was, he loved the big fancy guns. And I have not seen the actual gun that was the instrument recorded in the book during the shootout, but I've seen its partner, the other one, because he had a pair made.
Oh, boy.
And I've seen the other one. So yeah, these are big, fancy gun smoke have gun will travel kind of gunslinger guns. But at the same time, he was very sort of stylish and almost urbane in a rural environment.
And one of the things that you say about him, I mean, he was rough, he was a hard man, he broke horses, he was a bootlegger, but he was also a man of his word.
Yes.
And that turns out to be a hinge on which the action turns. He gets into a quarrel with one of his tenant farmers.
Yes.
The tenant farmer swears out a warrant.
Yes.
I'm just going to lead us up to where we want to be.
Yes.
The sheriff and Aubrey talk, and Aubrey says, I'll come in and I'll turn myself in for this warrant. I'll turn myself in the morning.
Okay.
But the law enforcement people sort of jump up at this. Take us through what happens that night, because
Sure.
that's the midnight cry.
Yes, yes. And if I might
Sure.
break briefly, the sheriff, he actually sent deputies to talk to Aubrey and the sharecroppers.
Yep.
And since the Kilpatrick farm was outside of the municipality of Boaz, it was outside the city of Boaz, technically the Boaz police chief didn't have jurisdiction. But, I mean, it was all his community. He knew the people, he knew the families. So when the sharecroppers made the complaint, they called the sheriff and they made a complaint that Aubrey had pistol whipped one of them and shot between the legs of another young man because he was angry because he'd been drinking a little too. But he came back from a trip to Florida and the cotton had not been planted, and that was what the sharecropper's job. And they found them at their cabin, sort of some of their son and some young men, some sort of roughnecks from the foundries of Gadsden, were dicing and drinking and that kind of thing. And he shot at them, and he they decided that they would report him to the law. No warrant had been sworn out at that time, but sort of as a courtesy call, two Marshall County deputies, Washington Bennett and James Lang, came and kind of played good cop, bad cop with the sharecroppers and then with Aubrey Kilpatrick. But with the case of the Boaz chief of police, who came as a courtesy too, and the two deputies, they all talked to Aubrey Kilpatrick, and they made a gentleman's agreement, if you will, a handshake agreement, that he's like, listen, it's late, we're tired, I've got 8 kids I got a farm, to check on. Let's just all, he goes, you know me, I'll come to the station in the morning.
Right.
And all of them accepted that. Because he was not known. I mean, yes, he was a bootlegger. He was, ostensibly outside the law, but he was not. He wasn't an oath breaker, I guess. So anyway,
they believed he would do it.
Right. But when they went back to the Marshall County Sheriff, Zeke Boyles, he didn't think that they should wait until the morning. So he decided to sort of make a preemptive strike. One of the deputies took the sharecroppers to a justice of the peace at nearly 11 o'clock at night to procure a warrant, and then Boyles, the two deputies and the Boaz chief of police all rode out to the farm to serve this warrant close to midnight.
So here it is. Here's a man, the father of 8 with his wife and 8 children in the house, his castle, and 4 armed people drive at midnight into his yard, let's say,
Yes.
up his driveway. And then, of course, there is chaos. He steps out of the house, he's armed. Gunfire erupts.
Yes.
When it's over, what's the toll when it's over?
At one point in the trial, when they were questioning the ballistics expert, C.D. Brooks, out of the forensic Alabama, it's called the State Toxicology Lab at that point. But anyway, Brooks pretty clearly says that from what the evidence revealed, it looked like the sheriff, who was seated behind the driver of his personal vehicle, which was unmarked, by the way. There weren't, you didn't have the bubble bar, you didn't have, it was just a black Pontiac Chieftain, straight up, 4-door. So the one of the deputies is driving the car, Zeke Boyles is behind him. So the ballistics expert says on the stand that he believes that what happened was, so Aubrey comes out of the house, and he is armed. He's carrying
yeah.
that enormous, gun. And what it looks like is that Sheriff Boyles told the deputy driving the car to lean over out of the way, lean over onto the seat. Boyles fired over that back seat. Because
Sure.
remember, back then they didn't have headrest. It was just a bench seat.
Right.
So he fires from inside the car twice. It misses Aubrey. Both shots do. It's hard to shoot through glass and everything with any kind of accuracy. And so Aubrey, who is, like I said, carrying a pistol, delivers 2 startle shots. Like, oh gosh, I'm being shot on. 2 startle shots. Then the other deputy gets out of the passenger side, shoots across the roof of the car, and hits Aubrey's center mass, which ends up. And as Aubrey is falling, his spinal cord has been severed by by Washington Bennett's shot. It was just a single shot from Bennett, and but Aubrey keeps firing his .44 as he's falling, as he's losing motor capacity because of the paralysis. And so there are 3 shots into the undercarriage of the car. And that gun holds 6 shots. And so there were 5 shots fired, 2 into the top of the windshield, the startle shots, 3 underneath the body of the car, and then a 6th one which dry fired because he didn't have the ability to pull the trigger anymore. He tried to pull it, but that's when he lost all motor control.
Now he's gone, but his son
Aubrey's
has
gone.
come out of the house, looked around the corner, and
Yes.
gotten a rifle.
James hears the shots. He comes out of the side door of the house and sees his father there on the ground. He starts to approach his father, realizes what's happened, goes back into the house and gets a .30 caliber carbine and comes out and begins shooting. He shoots the sheriff, Zeke Boyles, killing him instantly. Unfortunately, the true peacemaker of the group, which was Police Chief Leonard Floyd out of Boaz, the one that who tried to convince the sheriff, let's not go out there, it's late, let's wait till in the morning. He got his pants leg tangled up in some barbed wire on the ground, and when he bent over to try to get his pants leg loose, he was shot in the back and killed instantly. So the sheriff's dead, the Boaz chief of police is dead. Washington Bennett, who, and a quick thing I have to add, James Kilpatrick's younger brother and his younger brother's friend were in the back seat of the car at that point. Because they had stopped at the end of the driveway. The 2 boys had been out possum hunting close to midnight on a Thursday night. Different times. But anyway, so the law officers had picked the boys up and put them in the back seat of the car. So when Billy Kilpatrick who's a year younger than James, when he jumps out and tries to escape the car because there's bullets flying everywhere, the Chief Deputy Bennett grabs his arm. We don't know to this day whether Bennett, who was a father himself of young children, whether he was trying to keep young Billy from running into gunfire or if he thought about using him as a human shield. We don't know that. But all James saw, the 16-year-old, when he came out, was his father dead on the ground and some tall man holding his brother's arm.
So he starts firing away.
He said in his deposition, I shot him loose.
So at the end, Aubrey's dead.
Aubrey's dead.
And 3 law enforcement officers are dead.
Well,
and
Bennett died later. He'd been shot in the jaw and was in pretty bad shape.
So they arrest the boy,
Yes.
the teenage boy.
Yes.
The last third of your book is a series of trials, which I found interesting because this is a case where Stand Your Ground, which is in ill repute now, but would have been held in some regard on Sand Mountain in 1951. There's a good deal of shooting in the yard. His father's been killed. He fires away, thinking, in fact, he's saving his brother as well.
Yes.
And so the trials, there's a good deal of sympathy for this boy.
Yes.
He will ultimately, he won't be convicted of murder.
He was convicted initially of second-degree murder in the death of Zeke Boyles, but that was overturned by the Alabama Court of Appeals.
And then he goes to prison finally for
manslaughter.
Manslaughter.
Yeah.
As if there weren't enough going on, at this point you get a love story. Now the boy, James.
Yes.
How old is James?
He's 16 when the shooting happens. He turns 17 10 days later, but still very young.
Very young. And this girl, Ann Scott is a local girl. She's 15, I think, right?
Yes.
She strikes up a friendship and then a romance with the 17-year-old boy who's in jail.
Yes.
That's kind of nice. I mean, you wouldn't think so.
I do say in
if
the
your
book,
15-year-old daughter
yeah,
did
if your
it.
15-year-old daughter comes in and say, you know that boy that killed half the law enforcement in the county, I think we're in love. Yeah.
But they stayed in love.
They did, and they married after he was released from prison in 1950. He was released in December of 57. They married in June of 58. Had a son in 1960, and so yeah, it turned out to be a real love story.
I think, I'm not a particularly sentimental type, but I was touched that this boy is in the dumps. I mean, he's in jail.
Yes.
He has just turned 17. He's going to an Alabama prison. But this is not too gooey to say, but her love gave him the strength to survive, 5 years?
Yes.
In prison. And that's kind of neat.
Yeah.
They wrote, she visited.
Yeah.
That's
and the friendship that was formed between his mother and her, I think, sustained them both too.
right, and that too is unlikely.
Yeah.
That the family of the girl would be finally okay with this romance.
It does say a lot about. I mean, most of the people. And my father was the same age as James Kilpatrick, and my dad. So he remembers. He was like a functioning adultish person at the time, and he goes. A lot of people had just sympathy. They thought it was a terrible situation, not of James' own making.
Exactly.
That he got pulled into.
Exactly. Well, it is. I played in my mind as I was reading what the jurors were taking in and what they were thinking, and it was not simple.
No.
I mean, these people were home alone in bed when strangers came up and started shooting, so to speak. Well, that book is out, doing well, and I presume you're at work on something else.
I am. I'm working on, one of the chapters in the book is about the forensic process, because I'm fascinated by criminal forensic analysis, and I know a lot of other folks too. They watch all the television shows and true crime and all the procedurals and that kind of thing. But one of the one of the real life historical people who fascinated me the most was Dr. Carl Railing, who was originally from Coleman, and was educated at Alabama Polytechnic Institute, which is now Auburn, and then got a PhD in chemistry from the University of Wisconsin, and came back to Auburn to work on what was called the State Toxicology Lab at that time, and later it became the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences. And he moved it from a kind of originally it was a feed assay organization, like trying to see if farmers' livestock feed had been poisoned, and it grew into a really sophisticated, state-of-the-art crime investigation lab with satellite offices all over, and just the process, because back then you didn't have, DNA or CODIS or any of these things we learn about watching these true crime shows. If you wanted to know what happened to a car door when somebody fired a certain caliber weapon into it, you went and found a car door and you shot through it. And you examined the bodies of drowning victims, fall victims, and you looked. I mean, he was a field researcher and just incessantly curious, and really a Renaissance man in a lot of ways, and just a fascinating character. So I think I'd like to expand that exploration.
Good.
So that's my next
Well,
project.
he does sound as if he's started from almost nothing and built essentially a kind of state crime scene investigation.
At one point, the Alabama State Toxicology Lab was sort of scientifically more advanced than the FBI lab. So yeah, for a brief shining moment.
Well, I think that's a great place to stop on a high note like that. Well, Lesa, thank you.
Thank you so much.
This has
It's been a
been a pleasure.
pleasure. Thank you.